Hey all, Josh here, and as I promised, this is my review of John Woo's Red Cliff Part 2. Now, this movie kind of confused me, to be honest, and I don't mean in narrative complexity or whatnot, because though this movie is complex, I would like to give myself at least enough credit to follow a plot line, unless it's too abstract like a David Lynch movie or something like that. But again, besides the point, but because this movie takes a very different approach to the story than the first part of Red Cliff does, and I was really surprised by that. It's not only a tonal shift akin to maybe Empire Strikes Back for Star Wars, but almost a character shift too. Most of the characters that you did not get to see a lot in the first part of Red Cliff, you see a lot more of this time, and vice versa for the characters you saw a lot, you see almost very little of. So, main characters like zhu-ge Liang and Zhu Yu, granted, are still in this movie, but to a lesser extent than Cao Cao and other people like Zhao Cao, and I was really surprised by that, to be honest. I would have thought that there would have been more depictions of kind of the wuxia fighting style action scenes for Guan Yu and Zhang Fei or whatnot, and we do get a few of those closer to the end with the huge climactic battle, may I add. But the majority of the movie is actually much more slower paced than the first one, and focuses a lot more on psychological warfare, along with germ warfare, among other things. And it's an interesting take, but certainly not one I expected, like I saw. On the other hand, I do have to give this film props. It definitely gets across a much more gray area, and much more gray area than the initial film did. The initial film was something of good guys versus bad guys. Cao Cao, all he ever did was sit atop his throne, behind his army, going, "Oh, oh, oh, oh." As he slaughtered the Wu people, but he was giving much more to do this time. Feng Yi Zhang as Cao Cao did a really great job, definitely got a lot to show in this movie. Like I said in the last review, I think at least, that I'm glad that he was given more to do. Zhao Cao, really good in this. You don't see a lot of her in the first movie, and you don't even see a lot of her in the start of the second movie, but she really does play an integral role, and I did enjoy that. One thing I do need to point out is that Sun Shangjiang is maybe a little silly, I think. Her plotline is, it's very pro-feminist. I'm not against that, don't get me wrong, but given the time period, it seems really out of place. Especially when she pulls off a Mulan-esque costume or gender switch, and nobody can notice. It's very obvious. I don't know how the hell anyone couldn't notice, but I can get over that. Don't get me wrong. But I think it's just the fact that this played so much into the plot line, and it was an attempt to give her character much more depth, and I think it accomplished some of that, but at the same time, I'm not sure it was necessary to the plot of Red Cliff as a whole, and whether that time could have been better used to show more of the other characters, who I think were not as fleshed out in the first one, such as the aforementioned Guan Yu or Zhang Fei, which are reduced to little more than stereotypes at some points. Anyway, overall though, like I say, I really did enjoy this movie. I don't mean to be bashing this movie, I just want to get across this movie is very different from the original, and don't expect the exact same experience. I think that's a good thing, though. I really do think that's a good thing, because if I was given the exact same thing, I may have been happy with it, but now I am not only happy with it, but I have also guaranteed and also assured that the filmmaker knows what he's doing, because he does not want to repeat the same thing twice. He wants to give you a new experience each time, and I really appreciate that. That's something I can really appreciate. And overall, I thought the story flowed nicely. Like I said, it was slower paced, so you had to go into different expectations, but for that purpose, it did flow nicely. One thing I would have preferred, I think, is that if they had some kind of action scene at the beginning, like the first Red Cliff does, because I thought that was a really great way to pull you into the action right off the bat. Otherwise, I really don't have too many complaints. The final battle in this is simply mind-boggling in its enormity. Really, I don't know how long it would have taken to film, but it's got to have been immense. I'm in the process of watching the huge making-of documentary, which I will review along with the rest of the Blu-ray package or the Region 1 DVD, the extended cut, at a later point in time, but it looks like there was many troubles, and frankly, I'm not surprised. The last battle in this takes about 45 minutes to get through. It really does feel like a siege where all the characters finally come together. It's very satisfying. My only gripe with the end of the movie is, outside of being maybe a little abrupt for such an enormous production, I did enjoy that last scene, but outside of that, I think that because so many of the characters were paralleled with Cao Cao and had their own reasons for hating him, it really did come down to somewhat of a perplexing who is going to actually get Cao Cao in the end plotline. But because of the Sun Shangjiang plotline, they actually solved that rather nicely, and that lent some credence to that plotline, in my opinion, because I did not really like that subplot, but it did pay off in the plot for the plot as a whole in the end. So I'm willing to forgive that. I realize I'm being really vague, but that's intentional because I don't want to spoil anything as much as I may have during a couple comments. But it's nothing big, really. So, story of Red Cliff, a different story. I think it's a darker story than the original Red Cliff. There's much less romantic aspects of the war, but I think it's a very cool shift. I really appreciate some of the added characterization. Red Cliff was, as the first part, good with characterization. The script may be filled with overt bravado, but you know what? Frankly, I kind of like that, to be honest. In war movies, I dislike when they go, alright, let's just charge. Some people may like that. That's a personal thing. Judge that how you will. But the Red Cliff is very much like that. One thing I did want to drop on before I get on to other segments is that a lot of people have been telling me they really disliked the script in this, and I don't think it was that bad. I do not think there were any cringe-inducing moments like some movies. And while some of it, like I said, may not have lended to a massive amount of characterization, I think that's just typically inherent with this type of production where it's focusing on such a macro scale. It's difficult to get into the microcosmic perspective of specific characters. And I think they chose, again, like I said in the first review, wisely to focus on only like zhu-ge Liang, Zhu-yu, and in part 2, Cao Cao. I think those are the necessary components, and you could have shifted another way, but the way this is filmed, it works out nicely, so no complaints. So, the effects, this is kind of be a rehash of the first review. The effects, always amazing. Quite really cool effects in this one. The final battle, incredible amount of special effects, and they all look very good. As well, I think even the more subtle effects, such as the background and landscape details, really pay off. They really lend a sense of mood as they did in the first Red Cliff. And lastly, the score really is effective in this, and it brings back the main theme, alters it a little bit, but brings it back, and like I said before, I do like when they repeat and transmogrify their original theme to suit different moods. I know some people don't like that. Again, that's a taste thing, judge how you will, but it's handled really nicely here regardless. Lastly, I do need to mention the editing in Red Cliff 2, because I do have actually one big gripe about it. A lot of the first movie consisted of swipes, and I have no problem with that. Like vertical swipes or horizontal swipes, particular, much like the old Star Wars movies. Again, I have no problem with that, honestly. Normal swipes do not tend to feel overused because they're less intrusive, I think. And it was handled nicely in Red Cliff. They varied them up enough that you didn't really notice it. However, in Red Cliff 2, they have this new kind of fanciful editing transition where everything will start to become a picture, and then a burning sword will cut through it. And it's really fancy, especially for the recap at the beginning of Red Cliff 2. But they use it throughout the movie, and thankfully they tone it down, but in the first 30 minutes or 40 minutes, they really overused it. Sometimes it would be used a couple times within a minute, and it felt really obnoxious. I think that definitely could have changed, could have been fixed or done another way, but what can you do, right? It is a small gripe in a largely amazing production. I do think Red Cliff 2 is probably better viewed back-to-back with Red Cliff 1 if you can manage it, despite it being 5 hours long, because it is more of a continuation than it feels like a proper sequel, because like I said, it does focus on different people, and some characters do feel underutilized by itself, but taken as a whole, the enormity and immensity of this production should be commended. It was really enjoyable, may not have been entirely historically accurate, but I do appreciate the fact that sometimes they try to tone down the supernatural aspects of the original novel, The Romance of Three Kingdoms, that is. And overall, I was really, really, really impressed with this. The acting is by and large quite good. Couple people could have been better, but definitely suited the roles. I love costume epics. This is easily one of the best ones I've ever seen, frankly. I'm really not hyperbolizing my comments. And I think you should see this. If you like Chinese movies, if you like action movies, if you like historical epics, you like costume dramas, This is a fantastic movie. Go watch it. Red Cliff 2. Congrats, John Woo. You did a great job.